Welcome to Longevity is the New Wellness. I'm Will Bozeman, and I wanted to introduce myself today and talk a little bit about what this podcast is for, what it does, what we talk about. Longevity as a motivation for engaging in health and wellness is the ultimate topic of the show. I also want to incorporate a range of medical and health topics that I've discovered, learned, and developed over the years. And a lot of these all center around the concept of longevity, or they can apply to it very, very actively to the concept of longevity. And that's the purpose of the show. I wanted to start first by talking a little bit about my background and where this all comes from in my history. I actually started in biotechnology in college. That was an exciting field for me. I had initially gone to college and earned an undergraduate degree in a completely different subject. It was in archaeology, and I ended up in the staring at the face of a career that really had a very difficult path. Most people who ended up in that career ended up teaching, and there's not very many positions in that. I really liked the subject, but I ended up going to business school after that. And while I was getting an MBA, I ended up started a career in financial planning, and I just didn't really enjoy that very much after a few months in that field. Sitting there one day, just imagining what I would be doing in 10 years, and my heart kept going back to the sciences where I had really, really wanted to be most of my life. So I re-enrolled and started a program in biotechnology, and that was what got me on the path. It was a very exciting field. I loved every class I had. I loved every day I was in school. I have a lot of fond memories of getting up early in the morning and being excited for the coursework that day and for the things we learned. My ultimate path was to go to medical school, and that was what drove me to go back in to get the second undergrad and to get that science degree to apply to medical school. So that was the path. I was in the biotech program, and I'll start with a couple of questions that I've been asked many times in my career so far is, how did you get started in biotech? And I own a few companies at this point, so I have a lot of investors and doctors and people that I work with who always ask me some of these questions to kind of get to know me and my background. So how did I get started in biotech? While I was at my undergrad, I had already been through business school. So my mind was kind of geared toward thinking of opportunities in the business field and how you can use business ventures to actually grow and develop the fields of science. One of the most common aspects of science and scientists is that they're very good at the academic work, but then not necessarily business-minded people or not necessarily ambitious to engage in business ventures, which is where there's a lot of opportunity to develop the academic and scientific concepts that they've been working on. So to have a combination of those two is a pretty powerful force to be able to use the business background to help develop these science concepts. While I was in my biotech program and my very first child was underway, and she was coming in just a few months, and I had been looking at the field of cord blood and cord tissue storage for stem cells. We've been studying stem cells for years in the biotech program, and I was very interested in banking and storing my children's cord blood and cells. So I reached out to a few of the people in my program, and I found that there's a colleague in the field who owned a lab. And I went to him, and we sat and talked, and I said, look, I love what you're doing here. Can I rent some of your lab space? Can I open up a cord blood storage bank here? And will you help me develop the protocols for this and get this started? So he was very excited to do it. We spent a few weeks getting that ready. He was already engaging in some of that himself, and he and I worked together on my new venture with this whole concept. I had a few innovative ideas on how to expand that area. So he was excited to see it work, and I got it off the ground and going. And he was essential in helping me do that, and I'm very grateful for his help. It was about that time that I was getting ready for the MCAT and some of the prep for med school. That really cut back on how much time I could spend on the business. It was working, it was going, it was doing a little bit. It wasn't a huge success at the moment because I couldn't actually dedicate the time, but it existed. It was there. He was actually the person that I handed it off to when I went to med school. It wasn't successful enough to have been able to sell as an active company. So I ended up handing it off to him, letting him take it over and run it. And I went off to med school. And I did the first 2 years of med school. The other question I get asked is, so you went to medical school, but you didn't actually become a doctor. So tell us that story. That is a story. I was very active still in the research and the biotech side. Even while I was in medical school, I asked the professors a lot of questions. They aren't necessarily experts in the biotech field. A lot of the stuff I had done in my undergrad was stuff that they had a lot of times had never done or seen done and only had barely heard of. One of my professors in my undergrad openly admitted that the things he was teaching us in our first and second years of the biotech program were the very things he got his PhD in only 5 years before. That's how fast the field was moving. His PhD work was what he was teaching us in our first and second years. So it's a very fast moving field. If you're not already in it, then you have a lot to catch up on. So med school, I continued to study and learn a lot about it. I quickly realized what medical work would be. I've talked to a lot of doctors, even while I was in school. It'd be there's a lot of time. You've got 4 whole years of med school where you're going to be gone most of the time. And then after that, you've got residency and you're gone a lot there too. For a young family with young kids, it's a very hard concept to think of how much time you're cutting away from your kids and family. It's obviously worth the work you're doing for that, to become a doctor and to do that work. But I was sent a picture while I was studying one day. And it was a picture of my daughter at the time. Now, I believe she was 2.5, 3. And she was just laying on the floor in front of the front door, waiting for me to come home. And my wife had sent me that picture and said, I hope that you take the study time seriously, because this is what it's like at home when you're not here. So it wasn't hard to see how hard it was on my daughter, and she didn't really understand anything different. I had been in med school most of the time she was able to remember anything. So, but that picture did weigh on me. I realized that over the next 6-7 years, I would probably be gone even more than what I had been. And I kept thinking of things that I really could do that would be better for the world of healthcare and medical than to actually become a medical provider. My experience and expertise in biotech, I knew that I could do more broad scale things that could actually impact more people. So it was right about that time that some colleagues from out here in the West, and by the way, I was in med school back in Alabama. Some colleagues from out here in Arizona actually reached out to me and said, hey, Will, we are launching a new stem cell lab and a whole new biotech venture. We want your expertise. You've already done this before. You've already opened a lab and operated it. We want you to come and be the chief science officer for this company. And, we discussed it for probably 5 or 6 months. And I submitted a leave of absence to med school, and I took off and came out here to Arizona. They gave me 1 year leave. And then toward the end of that first year, the company was doing well and I just couldn't walk away. And I submitted for a 2nd year leave. They granted me that. And they just said, look, it's unlikely you're ever going to come back if you ask for a 2nd year leave, just letting you know. And I thought, you're right. But I'm going to take the leave. I appreciate it. And halfway through that 2nd year, I let them know I wasn't coming back. It was a huge decision. There was a lot of stress at the time. What are we doing here? The entire plan we had for years is now upset by this change in our life to actually come out and open this company. It ended up being a tremendously good decision to make. I had a lot more time with family, but also the company actually did very well. It took off. And one of the things that I was able to do was develop new products, new applications for biologics in the pain management space. Most of the work that I was doing was working with doctors to create treatment protocols, get their opinion on what works and what doesn't work when it comes to how different products are being applied, things like that. It was a very exciting place to be. I spoke at conferences. I probably coached, I would say, at least somewhere between 300 and 400 doctors over the course of 3 years on how to actually use and apply different biologics in the course of their medical treatment. I wrote probably about a dozen treatment protocols for how to apply different biologics for use in medicine. It was a very exciting field, very fast moving. And of course, at that time, the FDA was still figuring out how to regulate that field. So a company like ours was moving fast and growing rapidly. I saw pretty quickly the writing on the wall. The FDA was coming to start adding regulations and new compliances to the industry. And so I sold my ownership in the company, and I moved on and opened up others and moved on. And ever since then, that is what has gotten me into the biotech field. I've been in that space ever since. I've always owned at least one lab operation ever since my very first one. So that's my field in biotech. And a lot of people ask, how is that related to what you're doing now? So longevity is the new wellness. Both of those concepts, longevity and wellness, how does that have anything to do with biotech other than stem cells? The short answer is there are a lot of concepts in longevity that are essentially wrapped around all of the work that's been done. There's a lot of concepts in longevity that are essentially wrapped around all the work that's been done in biotech. Even back in the undergrad program, we learned all about telomeres. You'll hear about those later in the show. All about telomeres, all about DNA, replication cycles, all that stuff you are thoroughly educated and tested on. And in fact, some of the work that we do is actually directly related to longevity. How do we cell culture? How many replication cycles can we get from this cell line versus this cell line if we do this to the cells or this to the cells? We're doing things like that all the time in these biotech programs. So longevity was kind of de facto what we were working on, and even at that time, it just wasn't applied to the entire human body. It was only applied to different cell lines. So the concepts of how DNA works and all those ideas, those things really weigh in on longevity. Later on in my career, there started to become a lot of research coming out showing, hey, if you can do this, we can prove that it extends the lifespan of these cells, extends the lifespan of the whole human body. That got me very interested because it was right up my alley. It was stuff that I'd been studying for years. So I jumped back into that and started to study it more and more. And then at the time, there's a lot of great books on longevity, a lot of great voices out there, some very, very famous voices too. And I reference some of those in my book. They're great. I wish them all the best and to keep moving forward in that field. I feel like some of them are actually researchers in the field. Some of them are promoters, which is great. We need that. But some of them are actually conducting research as we speak on longevity, specifically in the biotech space. So it's exciting to see what they're coming up with and what they're doing. One of the ideas behind getting into this topic of longevity is the new wellness is that being in the healthcare space currently, and I have since the first lab, I've opened up several companies, some biotech companies, some of them have been labs, but I also have opened up multiple medical practices as well with doctors and actually operated in the healthcare space in the medical field. So I do have a little more insight now as to how doctors interact with patients. It's it's one of the concepts is how do you engage a patient to stay compliant? How do you keep them coming? How do you keep them engaging in a therapy or a treatment? Right? It's a common frustration that doctors have, is to get patients to care enough to want to keep going on a treatment program and actually achieve the success that they could get. One of the downward spiral would be that if they don't achieve the outcome because they don't actually complete the program, then they assume that it didn't work, and they assume that the doctor didn't give them the right prescription or the right program or something of that nature. But a lot of it really is involved around the patient not actually completing or fulfilling the treatment, or, as everyone knows, finish your antibiotics, right? You hear that a million times. People just don't do it. And I'm guilty of those things myself. I don't follow through with all the recommendations from all my doctors and things when I see them. It's pretty common. So the concept that something everyone is actually interested in is staying alive, living, the fountain of youth concept. Everybody wants to live forever. If you can take that level of motivation, the concept of longevity, and knowing that there is a way that you can add years to your life and add health and wellness to those years as well, would that be the motivator that actually encourages and engages a patient to fulfill a program, to complete a treatment cycle, to actually go the distance, because you can actually see the results occurring? And that's what got me down this path of there's got to be a way to engage patients and get them excited about being well and being healthy. And longevity as the new wellness is really where that concept is actually engaging patients in the idea that they can extend their life, they can extend their health, and doing so is actually the motivation for being well and for attaining health. So that is the subject of the podcast. That's the subject of this show. And we will go into many, many, many individual topics and discuss in more detail how they are directly impacted or how they directly impact longevity and your wellness. Thank you.